Hello, everyone. John Alexis Guerra Gomez again in here, and this is Web Development online course for Northeastern University, week 5. And this week we are going to be talking more about creating full stack applications. And specifically for this video, I want to give you an architecture, like a eagle's eye view of the applications that we have been building. Like in the previous project, we were using just a basic file server, and for the second project, we are going to be building like a larger application that actually has a backend. And I'm going to show you that with this chart. So for that, let me start right away. Then just reset this and we can go from starting from scratch. So basically, every time you're doing anything with web development, you're going to be using something called like a client server architecture. So you're going to have a client, and then let me go and put this one to be here on the top, and this text, we can make it like a little bit bigger. And we are also going to have a server. Okay. So this is going to be our typical two-tier, or we can call that like a two-layer or two-tier client server architecture. It's kind of like one of the types of architectures, but the one we have been using for the first project, where we were just creating applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, using the ECMAScript 6 and more, or ES6 language. It's kind of like a vanilla application. We have been doing something where we can actually go and say that we have like a smaller server. So I'm actually going to put this here, smaller. And then we have kind of like a larger client, and we can call that kind of like a file server or a static. It's one of these type of two-tier client server applications, and we can call it like a file server architecture, or your static files architecture. So basically, when we have an architecture like that, what that means is that you have a client, and we are going to have the server. This client that you have in here, it's basically like your browser. And then that browser, like you're going to have, say, like an URL, and inside that URL, you're going to be visiting, I don't know, something like localhost, and then you say 8080 is what we have been saying, and you just go to that website in there. Okay. So using that browser, we can go and try to make this one a little bit more smaller. And then when I make that thing, basically what the browser is doing is that it's going to be sending a request to the server following something that we call the HTTP protocol. Okay, so you can read more about the HTTP protocol on MDN as usual, and then this is going to explain everything that happens in the protocol and all of the type of requests that you can make. So strongly recommend you to take a look at that. Probably this might be one of your best first things to see. So you're going to have all of these elements. So this is actually a very nice image. So I strongly recommend you to take a look at that. But in a nutshell, what happens in here is that when you visit this on your client, this is going to be sending a request from the client to the server. And then um, this is going to have one or two of four verbs or actions that could be generated. So in this case, we are going to say that we're going to get a resource, and there are four types of those. You can do gets, posts, and then puts and deletes, if I'm not mistaken. Um, like we usually use mostly gets and posts. We haven't done any posts, but we have been only doing gets. So when you go and try to get these, this is the URL that you're trying to get. Whatever resource you put in here, like if you go and say, I want to get like john.html, that is going to be like the resource that you're getting. If you're not getting anything, when you just go and say that, that is going to try to get the index HTML. Okay? So when you're doing these, basically what that means is that you're going to have an application in here, okay? And this application, it's basically, as I've been telling you, a basic HTTP server, okay? Or an HTTP file server. So please remember, never test your web applications just double clicking on the HTML file, because you want to try to get something that it's a better server that gets closer to how the real web works. And whenever, especially your application starts requesting other resources, it's not going to work anymore. So in this case, we have been using the HTTP server, which is just a basic npm package. And the whole idea of the HTTP server, or using something like Apache in the real world, is that this thing it is going to be taking a look at any files that you may have on a repository, because it's just basically like a file server. So this is going to be like my static folder. You can say static folder. And then it is going to be just the basic elements in there. And then it is going to find specific files. So we can actually draw this like that. And then for some reason, I like drawing these icons just like this or something like that. It's a little bit big. And then hopefully I can select all of those. And then let's try to make it a little bit smaller. And then I can put some text in here that says like, this is going to be, come on, let me put some text, index HTML. So assuming this is my index HTML file, which is basically this one in here. Let's do that. So what's happening is that the server which is going to have this program, and I'm going to be drawing with circles like the different applications that you can run. In this case, this is an application that is running on JavaScript, but you can have like servers that are done on C or Apache or Rust or whatever. Um, Apache, it's actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's written on C. And but in any case, that server, when it gets this request, what's going to happen is that the server is going to say, do I have the resource that this thing is requesting? So in this case, it's requesting just the slash resource. And that slash resource, it's since I didn't specify any specific resource, that means that it's going to be the index HTML. And since it says, oh yeah, I do have the index HTML, then it can go and respond with an HTTP request. And the response it is going to send is the actual index HTML. Okay. So what happens is that index HTML is going to come in here. Okay. And then this thing is going to try to open that. And since it is a browser, okay, so in that browser, it is going to have like some text or something like that. You can go and put in here like a big header, like title, and then blah, blah, blah. And then it can also go and have like maybe, oh, I wonder, can I do this? Nope. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, no, I cannot. But then let's say that maybe like it puts some text in here, and then in that text it's going to have like a bunch of lines in there, like whatever. So it knows that it has to render those things. Okay. But then it might also have like on the side, like say for instance, like an image. Okay. And that image, when it sees that, then it notices, oh, that image that it's in there, in the code, it is going to say, this is the logo.png or something. So when the browser is executing that, it's executing the HTML, then it sees that there is an element that says that it's a logo, and then it needs that element or that resource. Then I can actually come and the browser is going to come and make another request. And this request, again, is going to be a get request. But in this case, I'm going to be getting the logo.png. Okay? And that logo.png is going to be another file. So the server is going to say, do I have that resource? So assuming the resource doesn't exist, then it can just come back and respond with something like, oh, sorry, but I don't have the resource. So I'm going to give an error 404, which is a file not found. Okay? But assuming that it does contain that, then basically it's going to be like another file in here. And again, this is static files. So this server, that's why I drew it first, like really small, because it doesn't really do much. It's just a file server. So in this case, it is going to say, oh yeah, I do have the logo.png. And that logo.png, let me get picky here, it's going to be like, I don't know, like it's an image. So I'm going to put like a circle, and I don't see any triangles or whatever. So let me put just like some kind of like shapes in there. And let's group all of that. So I can just take in here. Oh yeah, I do have the resource. Here you have it. And then basically what's going to happen is that then the client is going to say, oh, now I have that resource, and then I am going to display that resource in here. Okay? And it will keep on executing things. And if maybe there is a line in here that says that it has a script tag, and the script tag says, oh, I need the main.js file. Okay? And then, of course, you'll need to close that, whatever, but let me put that in here. So the browser is going to find that. It sees that it's not going to show the message because the JavaScript are not shown, but then it's going to create another request, and in this case, it's going to be a request for the main.js file. Okay? And when you make the request for the main.js file, it's going to repeat the same thing, it's going to spec the file to exist. So if I can go and select this one, then it is assuming that this is going to be a file, main.js. And in that main.js, it's going to, just put it in here, it's going to return that thing, and that's the thing that is going to be returned in here. Okay? Then that file, it's sent, okay? This file, it's sent um, to the client. And then the client is going to create another one, like a JavaScript engine in here. So this is going to be the JavaScript engine or like interpreter um, inside the browser. And this is very important. That JavaScript code that you write in there and that you wrote in your first project, it is actually going to be executing directly in the client. So if you're running like a web browser and executing some JavaScript in there, that code, like the processing power, is actually happening in your browser. So the thing is that inside that thing, you can have like something that says console logs and things like that. But let's say that as part of the code that you are executing in there, you have something that says something more interesting. Like you want to do a fetch of, for instance, API, or let's go and say listings or something as we had in the first thing that we were doing. So maybe you go and say something like, fetch me the listings file. When you do that, by the way, fetch, it's a command that you can run in JavaScript in case you didn't know, and it's going to start an asynchronous request to the server where, let me see if this has, like this documentation. Here is an example on how it will look. So you go and say, this is the URL I want to get, and then I want to fetch that specific URL. You execute this in the client, and then this is going to get a request for another resource. Okay. So assuming I'm putting like something like example.org, which is not my server, that actually is going to create another request to another server, which is going to be something very similar to this one. Um, like that one, copy, paste, and then, oops, nope, it's going to be another server, okay? And that is going to be the other server. For the moment, let's go and say that we are actually getting that request for the same server. And I know it's shorter, but just bear with me in there. And then basically this is saying, get me the listings. So what type of request I get? I get another get request. Although the fetch can also make requests for all of the other three verbs, but in this case, we are saying get me the listings.json. And since my server is just a static file server, it cannot really execute any code on the server side. Because of this, this is like a dump server. It's like a very client rich. It's like front end rendered, I want to say. Like it's also static files and all of those elements. So this is going to try to get this, which is going to be, you can set another file like this one. So I'm assuming that that file exists in there, and it's actually, we can change even this one because if I can ever, there you go. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. And then you want to say, oh, come on. Let me put it like this. And then let's just go and put that it's going to be an object because it's a JavaScript file. There we go. Copy group, copy, and then get that in here. And then basically this one is going to be the response that I get. Okay. So the interesting thing and what is happening in here when I do this fetch, that is what it's called like an asynchronous chronous request. Okay. And that asynchronous request it's going to take us to what we call Ajax. So basically, that asynchronous request that is started on the client is making a JavaScript request asynchronously for the server. The server is going somehow to return something. And this is what I call a data endpoint because it's returning data. It's not returning a JavaScript file, although technically it's a JavaScript because it's just a JSON object. But let's say that is data. It's not an image, it's not a video, it's not audio, and it's not an HTML file. So that data is data that I'm going to parse in here. Once it gets this file in here, it's going to say, oh, now I know what to do with that. And then it is going to put in here something that says, oh, you know what? Here are going to be my listings. And then I'm going to modify them and then just start rendering them in here, like with this, like with different cards as we were doing in the examples that we were doing in class. Okay. And those things are actually rendered dynamically without refreshing the page. So that is my best explanation of Ajax. It's that all of this is happening, all of that is happening in the browser. And then the browser is just requesting things to the server, and the server will have this element in here. Okay? So that is the very first part of the HTTP servers and like the very basic one that or the architecture that we're using for project one.